I'll have to put in for legislative pay increase, but
All right, we
Not in the
are
budget.
we're live on the YouTube.
All right, welcome to the YouTube. Welcome everybody, February 25th. You are here with the House Energy and Digital Infrastructure Committee. And we are here today to hear from our colleagues at the Department of Labor. So they're going to update us on some of their IT projects. So we'll go around the room and introduce ourselves real quickly. We'll have everybody in the room introduce themselves, and then we'll turn it over to you guys for the record. So I'm Representative Kathleen James from the Bennington 4 District.
Scott Campbell from St. Johnsbury, Calgary, Essex.
Richard Bailey, Lamoille 2.
Chris Morrow, Wyndham, Windsor, Bennington.
Michael Southworth, Caledonia 2.
Christopher Howland, Rutland 4.
Dara Torrey, Washington 2.
Graham Kleppner, Burlington.
Laura Spill, window 2.
Jack Locker, Committee Assistant.
Lisa Goffin, JFO IT consultant.
Rowan Holborn, Principal Assistant at the Department of Labor.
And I'm Chuck Kelly, Chief Staff Agents.
Great. All right. For the record, thanks for joining us.
Great. For the record, Michael Harrington, Commissioner for the Vermont Department of Labor.
And good afternoon, Andrea DeLabriere, Deputy Secretary, Agency of Digital Services.
So we thought we might tag team this because the projects, I'm assuming most are wanting to hear about our largest project, which is our unemployment insurance system modernization, but we do have a couple other projects, but each of those is a joint partnership. They are ADS projects, but we've been working closely with the agency on moving those forward. They're all in various stages of development and review. And so maybe we'll just take them one at a time. Some of them are going through some changes in vendors, but the one, again, probably of most interest to this group is our unemployment insurance modernization project. So we'll probably start there because I'm assuming the most amount of time may want to be spent on that. So it's a large project, and we can give some background, but just by way of bringing everybody up to speed, it was a $30 million project. It's a $30 million appropriation from the legislature that is a few years old now. We went through a full RFP process, identified our top vendor. It took us quite a while to negotiate a final contract with that vendor, which we were able to do this past summer, and the project kicked off in September of 24. So we're about 6 months in. Again, it's very early in the project. It's about an 18 to 20 month project timeline. There are essentially two sides to the unemployment insurance program. There are the taxes that are collected from employers, which are based on wages that employees earn. And so those wages are logged in our system called a wage record, and the taxes that collect go into what's known as the Unemployment Insurance Trust Fund, which it's held at the federal treasury, and we draw money out of that trust fund to pay benefits. So all taxes or contributions from employers go directly to paying benefits for UI claimants. So the first half of this project is on the tax side of the house, because that is the foundational data that is used to pay out benefits. And then the other side of the house is the benefit side, where when a claimant files, we have to determine eligibility on a number of different levels, including monetary eligibility. So have they made enough money in their qualifying year to make them eligible for benefits, and then how much in benefits are they eligible for, which is also based on how much they made in their prior employment. And again, so it's a dance between the tax side and the benefit side. We are currently operating off of a mainframe system that first went live in 1970 in June. The code was updated in the late 80s or so, and we are still operating off of that code. A lot of the hardware has been updated. It's now offsite at a secure location, but the challenges we face with this system make it incredibly unstable and unpredictable. And so we do deal with outages on usually a weekly basis related to this system. And a lot of that has to do with just, again, the interplay between this core system and ancillary systems that have to talk back and forth to the system. So we are very excited, as I'm sure many Vermonters are, about the modernization of our UI system, which should be live late spring, early summer of 2026. We have a project team from the Department of Labor and from ADS that is embedded with our vendor. Our vendor is Fast Enterprises. They are the same vendor, different arm, but a same vendor that provided the tax department and the DMV with their systems. So they have over 25, over 30 people in Vermont embedded on this project, and they are in person, and they're working diligently towards that fastly approaching deadline in 2026. That's kind of like a high level overview. I don't know if you want to add anything.
No, I think you captured it really well.
Yes. So you mentioned that the taxes go to the federal trust fund, and the benefits are separate. Does this mean there are separate requirements and separate sort of software requirements for the taxes versus at the federal level versus the benefits, which I presume are determined at the state level?
It does. There are certain aspects of the project that do have to meet federal compliance because we deal a lot with protected information. So we are working closely with like the IRS and Social Security Administration and the U.S. Department of Labor. The only transfer of money back and forth is that the Treasury has a fund for each state. And so we are depositing taxes into that trust fund every week when we know what we're going to pay out. We draw down those taxes out of that trust fund and pay out benefits each week. I think the piece to highlight is that this program has dual requirements. So it has the core requirements that come from the federal government. So it's a very heavily federally funded and federally regulated program. And then there are certain state requirements that every state has that kind of layer on top of the federal requirements, making it an extremely complex program.
Okay, yeah, that was what I was getting at. And another question that occurs to me is, as I recall, we were trying to work with other states to try to do this at one time, and did that fall apart, or what's the status of that?
So in a previous administration, even prior to President Biden, there were a number of states that the federal government put up a lot of money to encourage states to join consortiums with other states. And so Vermont, over the past, even prior to the Scott administration, was in a consortium. And at different times, those consortiums fell apart, not just the ones that Vermont was involved in. I would say probably 90% of the consortiums that were started nationally didn't make it to the finish line. So Vermont was in one very briefly, and then it moved into a consortium with the state of Idaho and North Dakota. And that consortium was around when I started at the department. We worked closely with the U.S. Department of Labor in that consortium, but in the end, the biggest challenge was that the lead state that was receiving all the money and doing all the development was the state of Idaho. And so they were focused on building a product that met their needs and not necessarily the other members of the consortium. And so once we got to a point where there was no more federal funding available for that project, we had to make the tough decision of, do we continue? We were still a year and a half away. And so we actually closed out of that consortium, I think in February of 2020. And so probably one might say a bad time to leave a consortium with the pandemic right around the corner. But like I said, we were still a year to a year and a half away from a finished product. And so it really wouldn't have helped us. And I honestly question whether we would have gotten a product at all out of that consortium. So we're in a better place now. It didn't help us necessarily for the pandemic, but with a with a direct contract with a vendor, I think we're in a much better position.
So we have our own contract with them. We're going it along basically.
We are. And many states did that after the consortium. So there's really only one, I think, viable consortium left in the country, and they had a product pre-pandemic, and that was Reemploy USA. There's a handful of states that are part of that consortium, and then there are a couple other states that use the product but are not part of the consortium. A lot of states are using private vendors for this work, but there's only because it's so niche and finite focus, and complex. There's only a handful of vendors that provide actually have a proven product on the market. A lot of them claim that they can do it, but there's really only 4 or 5 viable products on the market.
At least my last question, which is, as fast as the vendor for this product,
Yeah.
and have they implemented the product in other states?
Yeah, so they've deployed in a handful of other states. So they are one of the ones. And in many cases, I would have said pre-jumping into this project that they were the premier vendor in this space. So we were excited at our level, as a state the size of Vermont isn't always able to attract the largest vendors. And so the fact that we were able to come to an agreement with FAST, I think puts Vermont in a very good spot. Like I said, they've got a handful of other products. In some states, they do just the tax side, and some they do just the benefits. So there are states that have different systems. And then they have a couple of states where they've done the entire system.
Thank you.
Commissioner, so I want to go back to some of the stuff that you mentioned earlier in your testimony, make sure I understand the scope of the project.
Yeah.
So you may remember, I met you during the pandemic when we were all working together to try to help Vermonters access their benefits. And is this work, what I'm trying to remember is whether, so that volume completely overwhelmed the system, as I recall. And that was the first time that I, as a legislator, learned that we were operating on like a 40-year-old mainframe. Mm-hmm. So is this work, we're talking about the same system. This is now the work to update and replace that system, so that what we were talking about during the pandemic about, my God, this 40-year-old mainframe, it has to be updated. This is that work.
Yes.
Okay. Just wanted to make sure I wasn't missing something. This isn't a side
correct
project.
So this is a complete replacement of the entire UI system. And it actually includes other functions in the division that aren't part of our mainframe system. So right now, our mainframe system handles tax and benefits. What it doesn't handle is our adjudications efforts. So that's in a separate system. So when I talk about like the two systems talking back and forth to one another, that's one of those systems. Another system is our appeals system. I can talk more about what UI appeals and adjudications are, but that's another technology set that we use. And so that's a different system. We also, right now, the way we take our initial claims is through a separate application as well. We also have additional work and systems that help with identity proofing and validation and fraud mitigation. So a lot of, it's not uncommon, I should say, for technology systems to have multiples that interplay off one another, which is relatively easy in a modern scenario. But right now we've got all these different systems are of different ages, right? So trying to get a system that was built in, 2022 to talk to a system that was built in 1970 doesn't work very well. And so, again, this is a whole system replacement of that core system.
And so right now we're still operating on the old system, and things are proceeding. And in May 2026, you're going to flip the switch.
Yeah, there'll be some crossover. So, we'll do a significant amount of testing and training leading up to that. My guess is we'll be doing some dual maintenance. So there'll probably be a period where we're entering information into both systems to see if we get the same answer, the correct answer on the other side. Again, that's part of that testing and ensuring that the system, when it goes live, is true and accurate. But we will be doing, there was also a question early on about whether or not we could do one part of the system first, like could we do tax first and go live with that? And then could we do benefits? And so kind of iterative or stage deployment. And we determined that the risk was too high in terms of trying to modernize the tax system and then trying to get it to talk with the old benefit system and think that we're getting some level of quality or integrity in the end. And so that was the reason why we looked to do the full system all at once.
I have two more questions and then I'll turn it over to other folks. The 37.8 million, is that, forgive me again if you touched on this earlier, is that general fund money that we've been budgeting over some number of years, or where is that 37 million?
I might look to ADS, and the reason I say that is because back when the money was originally appropriated, it then changed buckets a couple different times, if you remember, because we were trying to do our best to spend down ARPA money, and then there was a waterfall approach to some of those funds, but they are general fund money, so it's not federal money of any kind.
Great, that's where I was starting to go. So we're not relying on federal money here.
Correct.
And where is the
I
Where's
believe
the
the
money?
majority of it, Madam Chair, is in the IT modernization fund. I'm checking with my,
That's what it says.
yeah,
The total cost of the project, so
You're right, it is in there.
the contract with the vendor is slightly under 30. The department has some money that was logged as technology money in its base budget, which will pay not only for the department's cost during the modernization project, but the ongoing maintenance and service agreements with the vendor. So when we look at the life cycle, the 5-year life cycle of the project, it ended up being, I think, a little over 40 million, but the actual contract with the vendor is slightly under 30 million.
Okay, and my final question before I turn it over. So what, for lack of a better word, what kind of stress testing do you subject this new system to in case there's another pandemic, or in case of some sort of huge disruption, or I'm not sure what else besides a pandemic would stress a UI system like that, but I'm sure there could be plenty of things. So, sorry.
So I think a couple of things that make this system a little different, and then I'll toss it to Andrew as well, because she can talk more about the overall state system. The volume was the biggest thing, but it wasn't the mainframe issue and the volume together. So, we ended up with, in 2020, about 98,000 people that collected benefits. A majority of those people made it through the system with no problem. The system was able to handle that volume. It was the fact that in our mainframe system, there are so many parts and pieces or processes that are manual that create choke points in the system. And so, whether we're collecting new applications electronically or we're doing it over the phone like we currently are right now, that creates a choke point where it's how many people can call our call center and get through, and how many claims can we open in a day. Right. There are other things like our adjudications processes, which is predominantly manual, that creates a backlog and a choke point there. And then there were other nuances of the federal program that created kind of dueling issues in the system. Some of it was like, we have a new piece of guidance that comes out 4 weeks after a new program gets deployed, but they want to make the new requirements retroactive to all the people who had already applied for the program, right? So again, it's like then trying to get a system to do something back in time doesn't work really well. So in terms of like when we think about the next, whether it's a cyber attack of some kind or whether it's another pandemic, in terms of volume, those states that had FAST as their core system, other than the issue of kind of creating these novelty UI systems in a matter of weeks and trying to deploy them, which, you can never be prepared for because it really is whatever Congress thinks up of at the time. But in terms of the volume and the pressure on the system, the FAST systems handled that volume without any issue. So from that perspective, I think we'll be in a very good place in terms of volume.
I agree with that. And I also think that, the mainframe has done its job. I will say that a 55-year-old system that's still functioning is a really robust system, and a lot of financial institutions are still using mainframe. So I don't want to say that it's a terrible system, but it is rather inefficient given the processes that we need in today's world. I also think that modernizing the system will allow us to be more responsive to changes, federal changes, legislative changes, what have you, that we're not able to respond to necessarily now because the processes are so manual. We saw that with the Department for Children and Families presentation with their Access mainframe. They were maintaining 30 spreadsheets in 10 different systems. This is not really that different. From a security perspective, we have the Chief Information Security Officer with a fairly robust security team. And with the combination of working with FAST and our own ADS and Department of Labor teams are going to do our best to make sure that it is ready to go live and that the cutover is successful. And that takes a tremendous amount of testing and time and processes that need to change in order to meet the new modern system as well on both sides.
The other piece we're, I think, relying on, and rightfully so, is that we have a vendor. They have a proven product that they've deployed multiple times in multiple states. And so every time they do that, they refine their process and deployment methodology because they want their products to be a success as well. And so, they are the ones that are helping us define what does that testing period look like? What does that period of training and crossover look like? So again, from that perspective, they're taking their collective knowledge from what happened in other states.
Mark?
Yeah, I'm just curious what the ADS role is. Can you be a little more specific about what your role is vis-a-vis the vendor and the department?
Sure. So we have a team we have the project management team, which is heavily involved on the state side. There's also some project management activity on the vendor side. So that's one aspect. We also have a team that we're dedicating to this effort from a technical resource perspective and as well as security resources down the road. And what else are we doing there for you?
Yeah, well, so on a very base level, who are intimately engaged in the project, we have an embedded ADS team that are working on the mainframe right now. So those people are also involved in the modernization effort because they will stay as the embedded team. I think we've got some folks that have some skills working with other FAST systems involved in this. And then I think there are different components like data conversion or system architecture or security, where they're being involved at different points in the process. For instance, there's another piece of this program that we aren't able to access right now because of the age of our system, but it's called the TOP program, the Tax Offset Program. It's a Social Security Administration program. The security requirements are obviously very stringent because you're dealing with federal tax information. And we don't comply with that system right now. So we're not able to access to a degree all of the different tax information that we could. And that's due to the age of the system. And so in this new system, we will be able to, so there is a team from ADS that's also helping us develop what will that TOP program look like in terms of how it's administered here in the state. So again, we're bringing, other than the embedded team and the folks dedicated to the project, there are also other ADS folks being brought in, depending on what the functionality is or the topic we're talking about at each stage of deployment or development.
Rep. Kleppner?
So I think the problems we're trying to solve are pretty clear. We all have constituents who have had frustrations with this employment insurance, and a 55-year-old mainframe speaks for itself. But I wonder if you've estimated any of the business goal improvements, like how much faster is a claim going to get processed than it is now, and is this going to reduce operating costs because you need fewer people manually doing all this stuff and that sort of thing?
Yes, to a certain degree. I'm not sure it's necessarily all been compiled into one singular document or form, but I can share with you kind of the area. One, the number of outages and disruptions will decrease. Those tend to happen, when they happen, they kind of throw our entire call center out of whack in terms of if nobody can file a claim because the system is offline, they all call the call center, right? So that's one area. If we can mitigate downtime and disruption, then the number of calls going into the system will reduce. A lot of calls we get into our call system is, I want to know the status of my claim. So right now there's no self-service in the system. So as a claimant, you submit your claim and then you just have to wait to hear from the department. There's no visibility into your claim. And so there will be full visibility into where your claim is and what the status is, and a way to communicate through secure messaging back and forth through the system. So that's another area where we'll see some gained improvements. Right now, you have to call our call center to file a claim. That's a security measure just as much as it is a system limitation. So for instance, at one point during the pandemic, when we put our claim application online, 90% of all the claims coming in were fraudulent. They were identity theft. And when we took the claim application offline and made people call, it flipped. 10% ended up being fraudulent and 90% were real. And so we went from a caseload of 2,500 applications coming in on a daily basis during the pandemic to 2. And so it was a very clear method for us. It was a low-tech solution for our team, but it creates challenges because, again, that bandwidth issue. I don't know whether we will reduce the size of the UI team because right now there are a lot of different federal measures that are still required, and there are a lot that we are unable to meet with the current system that we have. And so my hope is that we will probably maintain the same level of staffing as long as all things are equal. But be able to meet our federal benchmarks for like timeliness on adjudication. So there is a federal benchmark for how long a claim should be, how long it should take for a claim to go through adjudications, or how long it should take for a claim to go through the appeals process. So those are areas where we're hopeful to be able to bring those more in line with what the federal requirement is.
That's helpful. Thank you.
Yep.
Where is the call center and who works there? I'm curious to know about the call center. Yeah.
So we had, you may remember during the pandemic, we ended up having a vendor come on. So we no longer have that vendor. We have about 10 to 12 customer service representatives. The call center has been in different places at different times. And we typically don't disclose the location for safety and security concerns, but they're in a state office building. And part of that is because we are dealing with people on their worst day. And our staff, unfortunately, are sometimes put in the place where they have to tell people they are not eligible. Again, our system is creating challenges that, again, is preventing somebody on their hardest day or hardest week or month or year from getting the benefits they need. And so, for security reasons, we typically don't give that out. But again, it's a group of 12-ish people. We do pull people from different areas to staff up or down, depending on volume. Part of the hardest challenge is that the number of calls and the volume of calls we get on Monday at 8 a.m. is completely different than what we see on Friday at 2 p.m. Right. So, and then when you look across the year, the volume of calls coming in a week in June is very different than the volume of calls coming in a week in December, because Vermont is so seasonally based in terms of its employment. So again, that has always made consistent staffing hard. And we just aren't pulling in the temp employees that we used to be able to. Obviously for obvious reasons with how challenged our workforce shortage is at the moment. But again, they are 12 state employees, the Vermonters. They are assisting, without creating conflicts of interest, but they're assisting their neighbors, right? The people that are also Vermonters and going through this challenging time.
That's great. So it's in-house in state. I remember that being a bit of a flashpoint during the pandemic when you had outsourced to a company out of state.
Yeah. And the biggest challenge is that, I kind of align UI in terms of its complexity, probably very similar to healthcare in terms of like, it's one of those things, we know it exists, we don't quite know how it all works, and it all seems much more complicated than any of us ever want to know. I mean, I know more about unemployment insurance than I ever thought I would. Right. But because of that, it's not like when you hire a contractor or pull somebody in off the street and hire them for the job, it really takes 6 months before they're proficient in what they need to do, and probably a year to 2 years before they're a subject matter expert. Right. So that also makes onboarding and staffing hard. And when you lose, a subject matter expert on your team, it's very hard to replace that knowledge. It takes a long time.
Just another question, if nobody else has one. We had $30 million in the IT modernization fund for this. And I think we mentioned total implementation would be in the low 40s millions of dollars, which is a fantastic amount of money. So are we going to have an appropriation request for that? Or how is that?
Yeah, so
paid for?
the 40 million encompasses also the post go live, so the 5-year.
Right.
So from our standpoint, we have $3 million in the Department of Labor's base budget. That is covering staff augmentation and ancillary costs associated with the project, like location for the team and equipment for the team. But once the project goes live, those funds will then be used to maintain a small technical team and also the ongoing costs. So that money will make up the difference between the 30 million and the 42 million over the 5 years.
Okay, so that's a $3 million in your base budget ongoing.
Yes.
Annual base budget. Okay.
Yeah. I think, for the most part, I think we feel like we've got the funds we need. There may be a slight adjustment when we get further into the project, but I'm not anticipating any large change in the overall budget of the project.
I'm hesitating to ask this, but I guess I will. I'm just curious about how the price tag gets up into the tens of millions of dollars for these projects. And I don't know if it's possible to provide some kind of breakdown for where that money goes, and you just not, Joe get 40 hours on this, but is that something you could provide somehow?
But I'll look to you because it was a competitive bid. So we did collect, I think, 7 or 8 different bids. Before the deputy secretary started with the agency, and Sean Naylor was with the agency as the CIO and the deputy before that. I mean, at that point in time, I remember us talking nationally. We knew that we were going to be in the $30 million range because that was the going rate. So the fact that we were able to find a premier vendor for that amount, I can tell you that some of the other states have modernized to the tune of between $70 and $90 million. And that is everything.
We're just a small state.
Yes, yeah, right. But the difference is that some of that is scope and scale, but at the end of the day, the program is so heavily federally nuanced that it doesn't matter whether you're a large state or a small state, you still have to perform the same number of functions, right? And so that drives a lot of what the core pricing would look like.
Right. Yeah, I guess I was just wondering if it was possible to have some
Yeah.
general breakdown, so many staff doing this, that's X hundreds of thousands of dollars, so many staff. I don't know, something,
Yeah.
I don't know if I'm asking for too much. I don't want to micromanage, but I'm just curious, how do we get to that?
It was not
That seems like a big
the
number.
vendor did not, the vendors that provided the breakdown did not provide like staff time, staff dollars. So I think it's a breakdown of what are the deliverables, and what is the timeline of the project,
Complexity.
and the complexity of the project. And so I'll leave it to ADS to determine what can be shared or
Yeah.
what's.
I would
what's
just
proprietary.
say as a very rough calculation, the $30 million, a good tech person billing out at $150 an hour. It's like 65 people working for 18 months. Which, doesn't sound crazy to me.
Okay.
Right? Very rough math.
If the math is right, I don't even know. Okay,
Sounds like it got an informal affirmation for the end of the table. Other questions? So if I'd had my act together, which clearly I didn't, so we're trying to work systematically through a learning process of all these major ongoing IT projects. And I did not ask you to talk about workers' comp.
Yeah.
So on the No Surprises platform, we'll get you back in.
Okay.
I assume would be preferable.
Well,
Yeah.
you did offer to talk about other projects.
Yeah. I mean,
right?
I can certainly spend a few minutes if the committee has time. I'm good till.
We do.
Great. I think some of us all have something at 4:00, so we're good till about 3:45.
That's great. I mean, if you guys you're here and if you have
Sure.
I never like to spring things on people. But
No, that's fine. So there are actually four, just in total transparency, four modernization efforts going on at the Department of Labor. We talked about one of them. Workforce development is another one. Workers' comp is another one. And our federal accounting system. They may not all show up on your sheet for a variety of different reasons. Some are funded not through the IT fund. Some are funded. Some are part of other projects. So for instance, our federal accounting system, it's another 40-year-old system. It's called FARS. I think it stands for Federal Accounting and Reporting System. Very creative in the way we named that system. But that is within the scope of the long-term proposal for the state's ERP project. And so the idea right now, we have to maintain a collaborative system between Vision and the state's accounting system and our system. AOT does the same thing. Theirs is called STARS. I don't know what it stands for. And so we're looking to replace a lot of those old systems that are meant to comply with federal requirements on accounting, because the way the feds require us to do our accounting is slightly different than the state. And so this would be a way to build those into the new system. So again, those transactions can still happen. We can still meet both requirements, but it's happening in one system as opposed to two. The workers' compensation project is a long-standing project. We recently reached a point with one of the vendors in the project where we decided to separate ties with that vendor because we were not comfortable with the product we were going to receive or were receiving associated with the cost. And so we are doing some analysis now on what the next phase of this project will look like. The hope is that the project is still very much alive. There were multiple vendors providing different aspects of the project. So in a best case scenario, we're able to use all the same work that all the other vendors did, and we can simply find a different vendor to do this one aspect of the project and move it forward. Worst case scenario, maybe we look at a different solution altogether. I'm not thinking we will, but a lot has changed since we kicked off this project about 7 or 8 years ago. And that's from the first creation of the RFP and the requirements gathering till now. So I think we're wanting to do a little bit of soul searching in terms of what's next for this project and whether or not we continue moving forward with the effort as it was originally designed, or there may be something better out there now.
Go ahead.
Yeah. So in terms of that soul searching, is that curious about the relationship between the two agencies?
Yeah.
How much of your soul is being searched and how much of your soul is being
Yeah.
searched, and how that dynamic works?
Looking to each other. So
But exactly.
Yeah, I'll let Andrea speak for her team, but it really has been a partnership between the two. But at the end of the day, our business knows what we need the product to do for us. We just don't know how the product needs to, what it takes for the product to do what we need it to. And so that's where it's been great to have ADS to rely on from a technical standpoint. And so our last conversation with the project team, which includes both business side and tech side, was our business side is going to look to see whether or not there are what other solutions other states are using currently, and what the cost of those efforts have been. On the technological side, the conversation has been more about, let's look at what was provided by this vendor and how much of that is left to be provided, and whether or not there's another vendor we could work with out there that could do that same. At the end of the day, my big thing is I want our team to get a product in the end that makes their lives easier, makes them do their jobs better. And so, again, if we're just creating another system that needs to be replaced in the near future anyways, because it was started so long ago, and maybe it's not the perfect solution, we shouldn't throw good money after bad to do that. And so, again, I think this now is, because we had to pause anyways because of this vendor issue, I think it's a great time to do that assessment.
Perhaps, I don't know whose hand is up first.
I think so.
Andrea's gonna comment on that.
yeah,
Yeah.
I'm happy to do that. And I agree, it was definitely a collective decision and assessment, and it wasn't easy. These are really difficult decisions because there's so much work and time that's gone into these projects, but it was not meeting the needs, not only for the workforce, but for the Vermonter too. So I think it was a good decision. We stand behind it, and we did not make it in a vacuum. But it does give, I think, the responsible thing to do sometimes when things are not working out is to pivot and take a moment and regroup. It's an opportunity that you don't always get, knowing that we would be able to reuse some of the work. And that was the questions on our side were, what are the risks if we don't move this forward? And so that's how we arrived at this decision we did, and it was definitely collective.
okay. And so just to clarify, we have this December 2nd, 2024 report that says that things are still going along, but the decision to basically stop and go out to bid or go out for an RFP again has happened since then. Is
Yes.
that right? Okay. So that's where we're at now. We've sort of stopped development, and now we're gonna see about finding somebody else to pick up the pieces and deliver a complete solution. Because that,
Yeah, and I would say we spent a good 8 months, really trying to work with the vendor, maybe do an amendment to help address some of the concerns, get back with the project team, let a couple more months go by to see whether or not things had improved, whether we had more confidence in where we were heading. So even by the time, there were certainly our internal concerns, but I think we were still hopeful that we could work this through with that vendor. And then in January,
yeah, okay. I'm not
Yeah.
questioning that.
Yeah.
I'm just asking about the timing.
yeah.
And I assume that fast doesn't work in this space.
No, that is not
Yeah.
a fast. Okay.
Well, actually, it's a good comment though,
Yes.
because the pause for this project is it's a completely different system than the mainframe
Yes.
system. There is no impact to the UIM project by pausing the workforce or workers' comp project.
Okay, great. Thanks.
Yeah, Representative Southworth.
So cost.
Yeah.
You've spent a lot of money so far on this. What is the reality of having lost that
Mhm.
money to where you're gonna have to get a new vendor?
So part of the challenge that we came back to the team with is, we're happy to look at what other solutions are out there, but at this point, it has to be, if we can do it with the funds we have. And so it may be one of those things that based on the funding that is left, that our only option is to continue just with a different vendor and keep using the same work. I think again, it's a good exercise for us to explore what's out on the open market. And then if we are able to find something that we think is really a deal breaker and we should be considering on a larger scale about whether we want to change directions completely, it'll be a question of how much money do we have and what would we need? And that would be a different conversation.
And second part is if the vendor didn't meet expectations.
Yeah.
Is there a chance of recouping some of that from that vendor?
Hmm.
I'm looking to you just because it's an ADS contract.
So-
And he doesn't want to answer the question.
I can tell you how we
Did you
got.
see how smooth that was?
Excellent question.
It was the fact is, on all of these projects, it's
I'm
been,
just teasing you.
no, I know. But on all these projects, it's been Andrea and I that have been, meeting with the project teams collectively. So,
Yeah,
I know exactly what she's gonna say because we were sitting in the same.
we were, yeah, a number of different times. And so what we're currently doing is evaluating the milestones that have been met and agreed upon by both our teams and paying or not paying invoices based on that decision. Ultimately, it's the secretary's decision at ADS at this point, but I think we're all in agreement and have been so far that we have not, we feel like we have gotten the milestones that we asked for up to this point and have paid up to this point, but we haven't spent money that we haven't, I'm not articulating that very well. We haven't spent money that we're trying to recoup at this point. We're being very thoughtful about what is paid and what's not paid. Does that make sense?
Yeah, some of these are, as I'm sure you're aware, some are deliverables based and some are time and materials based. And so it really, in our mind, just depends on what kind of contract are we operating under. And if it's a deliverables based, we're not going to pay for a deliverable that they haven't met the criteria of. And I think that's where we're at currently. If it's time and materials, then that's a different situation.
So we don't owe them money and they don't owe us money. Is that basically what we're at?
Correct.
Yes.
Yep.
Just kind of an ADS process question. If we're 7 to 8 years into this without a product and firing a vendor, obviously from an efficiency and oversight point of view, that's not how we want to roll things out. What would you say are the main learning points from this process that we can apply across state government?
Yeah, I think they're both learning from the business side and learnings from the ADS side. This space, and being only a year into this role, let me know if I'm off track, but this space has not offered a lot of vendors that can actually deliver a product to meet the needs. It's a very limited number of folks that could do it. I think when this was scoped out, there was hesitation that we were scoping it correctly and that they could deliver the product we were looking for. But often, sometimes you don't know what you don't know and you don't know what you need always. And so I think, I don't know how long this has been in process.
Part of what I was going to add to that too is, if you actually look back to when we started the work on developing the RFP and putting it out to bid, ADS either wasn't established yet or had just been established. It was in
just
2017.
I was wondering about,
So,
how long has this been?
so I will say, some of the things that have led us, if we were to start this project over right now, I think we would be on a very different trajectory. But I think we had, the department went through, just in the time between 2017 and 2022 or 23, we had 5 different IT directors. The agency went through a whole bunch of turnover. We had a lot of turnover on, I think this project also had 4 different project managers throughout the project. So again, a lot of that had to do with just the new agency. And so from that perspective, I think we'd see a very different timeline and a very different approach if we were doing this now versus like, again, some of the conversations I remember having about this was literally right as the agency was starting. The department got its first IT director. She literally lasted, I think, like 6 months. And with the driving force behind picking the direction that we went with this project, and then immediately we had turnover and we were trying to bring the next person up to speed. So again, I think some of this is from a timing perspective, just the chaos that was in the system led us to the challenges we have with the fact that this is not a common space. And that's kind of why I want the team to also be looking at the market now, because it's 8 years later. And I'd love to know whether or not there are other products out there that other state workers' comp programs are using that may be more off the shelf, maybe a cost saver for us, and actually would deliver a better level of functionality for our team. But I think that's why we're married.
Executive order creating ADS, and I assume it wasn't up and running that day, was April of 2017, and then this project was launched in December 2018. So
Yeah.
early days probably
Yeah.
for ADS representative.
Yeah, so you sort of answered my question. Now you've got to look for a new vendor. And my question was, are there systems out on the shelf that you might be able to use that has already been sort of constructed? And say, oh, we can just, with this modification, we can tweak it to make it work for Vermont? Or do all the systems need to be created from scratch?
I don't think they do. Part of what I've asked my program manager to do in that area is to talk with her counterparts in other states that operate workers' comp programs to find out whether or not, again, did they custom build their system, or are they using some vendor that's providing an off-the-shelf or solution that's slightly customized. So that's part of that process. And at the same time, and again, I think this is the whole, like, we don't want to waste time on this. So at the same time, the tech side of the house is reviewing the deliverables that the vendor provided to see, okay, how far are we actually at away from going live with a solution, so that if we decide to continue with a vendor on the same solution, what are we actually asking that vendor to do?
You want to follow up?
Just a quick follow-up. So you are hoping you can use what's already been created for the new system, hopefully.
I think that's our fastest path.
Yeah.
And if what we've got can meet the needs of our team, that's the way to go. But again, we should be looking also just to say, okay, what else is out there? And again, it may inform whatever the next iteration of a system looks like down the road. Not anytime in the immediate future. But again, part of what I don't have a good grasp on, I don't think the team does this. How far away are we from the functionality we would need in deployment of the project, and how far is that gap from where we are and where we need to be? Then if it's not that wide, then that may be the best solution.
Just quickly, so I'm struck by the difference in cost for this system versus the UI system. That was $30 million. This was $2 million. I assume vastly less complex. I'm wondering if it's also maybe a large part of it is the lack of federal involvement, or is there federal involvement?
There's lack of federal involvement, like the level of reporting requirements and data tracking is not the same. There's also this system in workers' comp isn't having to do a lot of math, we'll put it that way, right? So there's a lot of calculation that the UI system does, everything from the tax side and calculating tax rates to tracking payments, debts and collections, and then calculating benefits based on lexicon of criteria, and then determining what that is. And then we have the whole function of overpayments and underpayments and collections on that side of the house. So there's when we talk about workers' comp from Vermont agency perspective, we're a mediator. We are a decision maker. Dispute resolution is really what we do. So there's case tracking, and there's collection of materials and digitizing of materials and storage of electronic records. And then there's some case management. But other than that, it's not performing highly complex functions. Because the dispute resolution is really between our staff comes in, looks at the injured worker and the claim of the injured worker, the claim of the employer and the employer's insurer, and again tries to bring resolution to that.
Right. You're not tracking all that data, you're more monitoring.
Right. We're housing the data, we're using the data to make informed decisions, but it's very different.
Yeah, great. Okay, thanks.
That was my question. I was trying to understand what's involved in the world of workers' comp.
Yeah.
There's a whole insurance industry system involved here.
Yeah. So even when we make a determination on payment to injured workers, it's the insurer that's making that payment. So we're simply making the determination. We're not collecting any money or doing any calculation, and we're not distributing any funds.
Good. Thanks.
Yes, ma'am.
Oh, go ahead.
No, I was going to switch to a different.
Oh, I'm not switching.
I didn't think so. I messed up.
Yeah. Well, the reason I'm not switching is that I think this is really actually for me illustrative of the ADS dashboard bill that we're trying to pass and why it would help us. Because I'm looking at the ADS annual report, which I understand is a snapshot in time. It's December 2nd, 2024. And it's showing total IT activity of 3.174 million, implementation of 2.75 million. And then if you try to correlate that against the ADS dashboard, it shows an estimated implementation of 1.464 million. This is not really, I don't think, for you, Commissioner Harrington. So it's just sort of like, so if we're looking at the annual report, we see, okay, so there's a total IT activity cost as of December of 3.174 million. There's an implementation cost of 2.75 million. But if you try to correlate that to the dashboard, it shows an implementation cost of 1.464 million. And then there's also different completion dates.
Would you like me to respond to that?
I think so, yeah, because just as a citizen legislator and essentially we're part-time policymakers. We come up here and try to do the best job we can.
Of course.
It is very difficult to, and then we found out today that there's new info. So it's how do we know, I think for me, it shines a light on how important this bill is. Yeah. For us, but yeah, please.
So thanks for the chance to respond, Madam Chair, and thanks for the question. I think that we understand that the dashboard is not meeting the needs of the people that are viewing it. I also want to just add that it wasn't intended necessarily to do the job that you're asking it to do. We are very much open to making changes that are possible, and I think that a lot of those are already in progress.
Yeah.
I feel, this is my opinion, I have not spoken with the Secretary about this, but I feel like the willingness to work together to make the dashboard more meaningful is good work, no matter if there's a bill in place. And putting a bill in place would put some substantial restrictions on how responsive we can be in the future. That would be my only comment is.
Please finish.
So I feel like having a bill with very succinct language would put some restrictions on any responsive behaviors we could offer in the future. So if you expect one thing, but maybe later on would like an additional change, that we're not able to do in a timely manner, we're going to be in a position where the bill is then out of date and we're going to have to adjust the bill. Those are the kinds of things that I think about as a person who looks at the dashboard. It doesn't currently meet the needs and we need to adjust and we need to make it more meaningful. And I think that's where the conversation starts.
And we are, and then I see you're up, Sabina. We are hearing from Secretary Riley Hughes and Johnson. So they'll be,
Okay, great.
they're coming in tomorrow, and I'm not sure that's exactly what we're gonna. I think we're gonna hear something more. In my experience has been that in the lack of a bill, it becomes sort of a handshake agreement. And 2 years from now, if we're all gone and, you know, everybody's moved on to different jobs, then the work is lost. Representative Sebelia?
So I'm interested in your last comments and just better understanding that. So the ADS bill, which is what you're referencing, that is looking at making adjustments to the dashboard. So what, right? And then making some adjustments to reporting requirements, thresholds, that type of thing. So I think what I heard you say is that if we were to put in a bill, that will create a situation that makes it harder for us to work together.
Mm-hmm.
Sure.
No, I don't think it's harder for us to work together. I think it's being able to be responsive to change.
So if we change the existing language around reporting and with records and requirement.
We're gonna get more testimony on this.
Yeah, I think the secretary is probably better suited to answer these questions than I am. I just wanted to share my personal opinion, and having been the DEVA commissioner for a couple of years, I understand the complexities of making these kinds of changes and their unintended impacts later on. That's all.
So,
And sorry.
may
Yeah, go ahead.
continue?
Yeah.
So, and I believe I heard Secretary Riley Hughes say something similar, and so I feel like I'm missing something. In terms of something's not connecting here. So, I mean, I think we are proposing changes to reporting records and review requirements, like existing language.
Sure.
And so I'm not sure what flexibility is being removed by changing existing language around reporting.
If I may, I think what's missing is the fact that the secretary is, I think, preparing to come in tomorrow and give us pretty extensive testimony on what language changes they would like to see in the bill and why.
Okay.
So
I think that's much
I think that's better
approach,
because we've got plenty of time blocked out for that, and we may agree with what the secretary is going to propose. We may disagree with what the secretary is going to propose, but she's prepared to come in and say, this is what I think about your current language. This is the different language I'd like to propose. And then I would assume that a robust conversation will ensue.
Yeah, I will just, for clarification, to ensure clarification, restate that I feel like I might be missing something here.
I don't think so. The secretary told us that she'd like to come in with language, and we met with her yesterday, which you knew.
Yep.
And so tomorrow she's on the agenda.
Yep.
To come in and talk to
No,
me about.
I don't mean missing something in terms of that.
Okay.
I don't mean, that's not at all what I mean, Madam Chair. No, that's
Nothing
not.
secrets
No,
happening.
that is not at all what I meant.
Okay.
Just in terms of what I've heard as testimony today, and I've heard something similar from the secretary, I keep feeling like what I'm hearing is having me question, like, do I understand really what's going on in this bill? Like, is there,
Yeah.
and you're saying we're gonna have secretary come in, but I legitimately feel like maybe I'm missing something really big, because this feels very minimal to me.
I don't want to speak further.
Yeah, we better let you guys go.
Oh, yeah, I'm sorry. Quickly, yes, I'm sorry.
So if I understood from previous testimony that that's the system you need an upgrade of. Is that correct? That tracking system?
That's the system that the agency
The
developed.
dashboard
Mhm.
that
The
needs to be
dashboard
upgraded,
they developed to meet the needs at the time.
that needs to be upgraded.
It's
The back end stuff, sorry. The back end stuff. Yeah, a lot of it's manual spreadsheets.
Yeah.
Like that.
yeah, and our needs have evolved.
Yeah.
We're doing many more projects than we ever have done before. So the need has evolved. So we need to adapt to that for sure.
You have to go?
We're happy to come back. If you'd like to discuss anything else.
Sounds great.
That was very helpful.
Yeah.
Yeah, thanks for diving into another
Absolutely.
topic. Appreciate it.
Yeah.
All right, we can